Most people don't make their kitchens unsafe because they're careless. They do it because they're trying to keep them clean. That's the surprising part. Right now, somewhere in America, someone is making dinner in a kitchen that looks perfectly normal. The counters have been wiped down, the dishes are mostly done, everything feels clean enough. And yet, one small habit, something millions of people do every single day because they believe it's hygienic, may be quietly spreading bacteria across the sink, the faucet, the countertop, and even the food they're about to serve. The most dangerous kitchen habits rarely look dangerous. In fact, they often look responsible. Now, to be fair, not every Japanese household follows these habits perfectly, and not every Western kitchen ignores them. This isn't about proving that one culture is cleaner than another. It's about understanding a different philosophy. Many Japanese kitchens are built around one simple idea: prevent small problems before they become bigger ones. Separate what should never mix. Finish today's work before tomorrow begins. Treat food as something worth protecting, not something easy to replace. Today, we're going to explore 7 everyday kitchen habits that feel completely normal in many Western homes, but can seem surprisingly careless from a Japanese point of view. Habit number 4 is probably the biggest surprise, because millions of people still believe it's one of the cleanest things they can do. It isn't. And habit number 7 has almost nothing to do with bacteria. Instead, it reveals something much deeper about gratitude, waste, and the quiet relationship we have with the food that keeps us alive. By the end of this video, you may realize that Japanese kitchens aren't calmer because people spend more time cleaning. They're calmer because they're designed to create less mess, fewer decisions, and far less waste in the first place. And it all begins with one of the most trusted surfaces in your kitchen. Habit 1. Using one cutting board for everything. Imagine you're making dinner after a long day. You slice up some raw chicken, give the cutting board a quick rinse under the faucet, then immediately reach for the tomatoes, cucumbers, or lettuce. It feels efficient. After all, the board doesn't look dirty anymore. But this is exactly where one of the most common kitchen mistakes begins. The problem isn't what you can see, it's what you can't. Raw poultry can leave behind bacteria that are invisible to the eye. A quick rinse may wash away bits of food, but it doesn't necessarily remove everything that matters. Once that same board touches ingredients that won't be cooked again, you've created an opportunity for cross-contamination without even realizing it. In many Japanese kitchens, this step is handled differently. The cutting board, or maneda, is often treated as more than just a piece of kitchen equipment. It's part of a system. Some households keep separate boards for raw meat and ready-to-eat foods. Others simply use different sides of the same board. And many home cooks prepare vegetables first, raw meat last, then wash the board thoroughly before using it again. Notice something interesting. None of those solutions require an expensive kitchen. They simply require a better sequence. That's an idea you'll see again and again throughout Japanese homes. Instead of relying on people to remember every little detail, the environment is arranged so the safer choice becomes the easier choice. Japanese kitchen discipline often begins by preventing categories from mixing: raw and ready to eat, clean and contaminated, today's task and tomorrow's meal. Because once two things that should stay separate become mixed, solving the problem is always harder than preventing it in the first place. But food isn't the only thing that can quietly collect what we leave behind. Sometimes, the next source of contamination is sitting in the sink, waiting until morning. Habit 2. Leaving dirty dishes soaking overnight. It's late. Dinner is over. The frying pan is still greasy. There's a little rice stuck to the bottom of the pot. The sink is filling with warm, cloudy water. You look at it and think, I'll deal with it tomorrow. Most of us have made that decision. Once or twice doesn't seem like a big deal, and sometimes soaking a stubborn pan for 10 or 15 minutes really does make it easier to clean. But there's a difference between soaking one difficult pan and leaving an entire sink full of dirty dishes until the next morning. As the hours pass, food residue softens, odors begin to develop, and cleaning often becomes something you dread instead of something you simply finish. In many Japanese homes, dinner isn't considered completely finished until the kitchen has been quietly reset. Not because every surface has to be perfect, but because tomorrow shouldn't have to begin with yesterday's unfinished work. Many families naturally follow a simple routine. Food scraps are cleared away. Items that will become harder to clean are rinsed first. The easiest dishes are washed while they're still fresh, and before the lights go out, the sink is empty, or at least almost empty. It usually takes only a few minutes. But those few minutes change the way tomorrow begins. That's the part many people overlook. A dirty dish isn't only physical clutter. It's an unfinished decision waiting for tomorrow's version of you. The next morning, before you've had your coffee, before the day has even started, you're already dealing with yesterday. Japanese homes often try to remove that invisible burden before it has the chance to grow. A clean kitchen tonight is a quiet gift to the person who wakes up tomorrow. And even when the sink looks perfectly clean, one everyday kitchen tool may still be holding far more than meets the eye. Habit 3. Using one old sponge for every surface. Now, take a moment and think about the kitchen sponge sitting next to your sink. How old is it? Does it have a smell? Does it ever become completely dry? Or has it quietly become the one tool that cleans everything? The dishes, the countertop, the stove, even the sink itself. At first, that seems practical. One sponge, one job, simple. But over time, that single sponge begins carrying tiny traces from one part of the kitchen to another. Food residue, grease, moisture. Sometimes things you can't see at all. The problem isn't simply that a sponge gets dirty. It's that a damp sponge, filled with food particles and used over and over again, creates an ideal place for bacteria to remain and then travel somewhere else. Many Japanese households approach this differently. Instead of asking one tool to do every job, they give each cleaning tool a clear purpose. One for dishes, another for the sink. Sometimes a separate brush for heavier cleaning. It isn't about owning more. It's about preventing one cleaning tool from becoming the bridge between clean and dirty. A simple way to remember this is with 4 words. Clean. Rinse away food particles after every use. Dry. Wring it out completely and leave it where air can circulate. Separate. Don't ask one sponge to clean every surface in the kitchen. Replace. Not on a fixed schedule, but when it smells, becomes slimy, starts breaking down, or no longer dries properly. Some people even prefer a dish brush because it dries faster. Others color code their cleaning tools so everyone has a single job. The solution isn't always buying more. It's making every tool easier to trust. And there's another Japanese idea worth mentioning here. Matanai doesn't mean keeping something forever. It means respecting it while it still serves its purpose and letting it go when it no longer does that job safely. A cleaner kitchen isn't created by scrubbing harder. It's created by giving bacteria fewer places to stay in the first place. And the next habit is perhaps the most surprising of all, because millions of people do it believing they're washing bacteria away. Habit 4. Washing raw chicken under running water. This may be the most surprising habit on the entire list, not because it's uncommon, but because millions of people still believe it's the cleaner choice. If you grew up watching your parents or grandparents rinse raw chicken before cooking, you're certainly not alone. For many families, it simply feels like the responsible thing to do. The water washes away the surface liquid. The chicken looks fresher. And it feels as though you've cleaned it before putting it in the pan. The intention is completely understandable. The problem is that water cannot safely do what heat is designed to do. As the chicken sits under running water, tiny droplets can splash far beyond the sink. Some may land on the faucet, others on the countertop, a nearby dish, fresh vegetables waiting to be chopped, or even the towel hanging beside the sink. Most of the time, you won't notice it happening. That's exactly why it's easy to underestimate. In many Japanese kitchens, the goal isn't to make raw chicken look cleaner. The goal is to keep anything that has touched raw poultry from spreading to places where it doesn't belong. Instead of rinsing the chicken, the package is opened carefully to keep the juices contained. Ready-to-eat foods are kept well away from the preparation area. Hands, knives, and cutting boards are washed immediately after use. Then the chicken is cooked thoroughly because heat, not running water, is what makes poultry safe to eat. Notice the difference in thinking. One approach tries to clean the chicken, the other tries to protect everything around it, and that small shift changes the entire kitchen. Good intentions are not always enough. A safer kitchen is built on a safer system, not simply a familiar routine. The first 4 habits we've explored all have one purpose: protecting food from contamination. But the next 3 habits protect something even bigger: the order of the home, the way we use our space, and the quiet habits that shape everyday life without us even noticing. Habit 5. Wearing outdoor shoes in the kitchen. Think about everywhere your shoes have been today: the grocery store, a parking lot, a gas station, the sidewalk, maybe even a public restroom. Now imagine walking through your front door and straight into the kitchen without changing them. For many Western families, that's completely normal. It's simply how the house has always worked. In Japan, however, the front door marks an invisible line. The moment people step inside, outdoor shoes come off. Not because Japanese homes are trying to make the floor perfectly sterile. That's almost impossible. The goal is much simpler: carry less of the outside world into the place where daily life happens. What's interesting is that this habit isn't only about cleanliness, it's also about psychology. Removing your shoes sends a quiet signal to the brain. Work is over. The outside world stays outside. Home begins here. That's why many Japanese people describe the entrance not simply as a place to take off shoes, but as the boundary between 2 different worlds. And you don't need a traditional Gen-Con to borrow this idea. A simple shoe tray beside the front door, a pair of indoor slippers waiting nearby, or even deciding that shoes never go beyond one certain point inside the house. Small changes like these create a clear boundary, and clear boundaries make every room beyond them easier to keep clean. Because the less dirt you carry through the front door, the less cleaning every other room asks from you later. A peaceful home often begins by deciding what is not allowed to cross its boundaries. And the next boundary is even easier to overlook. It isn't at the front door. It's inside your refrigerator, quietly separating the food you'll actually eat from the food you'll eventually forget. Habit 6. Leaving food uncovered and disorganized in the refrigerator. Open your refrigerator for a moment, not to grab something, just to look. What's sitting on the top shelf? Is there a container with only a little food left inside? A bowl covered loosely with plastic wrap? Something pushed all the way to the back that you honestly can't remember buying? Most refrigerators don't become disorganized overnight. They slowly fill with good intentions. Leftovers you'll eat tomorrow. Vegetables you'll cook this weekend. That sauce you'll definitely use again. Then another grocery trip happens. New food goes in front. Older food disappears behind it. Strong-smelling dishes begin sharing space with delicate ingredients. Containers are left half-covered. Some food slowly dries out. Other food quietly gets forgotten. And eventually, it's thrown away. Not because anyone wanted to waste it, but because no one could see it anymore. In many Japanese homes, the refrigerator is treated less like storage and more like a living part of the kitchen. Every item is expected to have a next purpose. One simple habit that reflects this idea is creating what many people call an eat-first zone, a single shelf, or one small tray, reserved for food that should be used soon. Older leftovers stay in front. Containers are transparent or clearly labeled. Some families even write the date or decide the next meal before putting food away. Because once you know where something belongs, you're much less likely to forget it exists. Food is rarely wasted because people don't care. It's usually wasted because it quietly becomes invisible. And invisible food almost always becomes forgotten food. Because what stays visible usually gets used, and what disappears from sight often disappears from the dinner table as well. Habit 7. Throwing away food without thinking. The final habit has very little to do with bacteria, and almost everything to do with perspective. Think about the last time you threw food away. Maybe it was a container of leftovers hidden in the back of the refrigerator, a bowl of rice that never got finished, vegetables you meant to cook over the weekend, or groceries you bought with good intentions but never found time to use. Most people don't waste food because they don't care. Life simply gets busy. Plans change. Things are forgotten. That's why this final habit isn't really about blame. It's about noticing something we often stop seeing. In Japan, there is a word that captures this feeling, motenai. It is often translated as, "what a waste," but that translation only tells part of the story. Motenai is the quiet feeling that something valuable still had life left in it, the farmer's work. The rain that helped the crops grow, the energy used to transport the food, the time someone spent preparing the meal, even the simple privilege of having enough to eat. Before many meals, Japanese families say itadakimasu. People often translate it as, "I humbly receive." But behind those words is a quiet acknowledgement that many hands and many forms of effort made this meal possible. That perspective naturally changes the way food is treated after the meal is over. Respecting food doesn't mean forcing yourself to keep eating when you're already full. It means serving a little less at first, taking more only if you still want it, freezing leftovers before they're close to spoiling, planning one meal each week around food that's already waiting in the refrigerator. Yesterday's rice becomes fried rice or okazuke. Leftover vegetables become soup. Cooked chicken becomes tomorrow's lunch. The goal isn't perfection. It's giving food a second chance before giving up on it. Because motenai isn't guilt about what has already been wasted. It's awareness of the value that still remains. And perhaps that's the quiet difference between two kitchens. One sees leftovers as yesterday's food. The other sees tomorrow's meal waiting to happen. The hidden principle behind all 7 habits. At first, these 7 habits may seem completely unrelated. One is about a cutting board, another is about a sponge, then shoes, then leftovers, then food waste. But if you step back for a moment, you'll notice they're all quietly teaching the same lesson. They all protect boundaries. Raw food stays separate from ready-to-eat food. Clean tools stay separate from dirty ones. Outdoor dirt stays outside the home. Food that should be eaten soon stays visible. Today's work doesn't spill into tomorrow morning. Enough never quietly turns into excess. At first glance, these may look like cleaning habits, but they're really habits of design. The goal isn't to ask people to make perfect decisions every single day. The goal is to build a kitchen where the right decision is already the easiest one to make. Think about everything the kitchen quietly decides for you. Which cutting board should I use? Where do my shoes stop? Which leftovers should I eat first? Which sponge belongs to the sink? What should be finished before I go to bed? When those answers are already built into the space, daily life becomes surprisingly calm. That's why many Japanese homes feel easier to maintain. Not because people are constantly cleaning, but because the environment quietly removes dozens of tiny decisions before they ever become problems. You could summarize that philosophy in 5 simple ideas. Separate, keep things that don't belong together from ever mixing. Contain, stop mess before it spreads. Reset, finish small tasks before they become tomorrow's burden. Preserve, protect freshness, visibility, and usefulness. Respect, value not only the food itself, but also the time, effort, and people behind it. When you look at the kitchen this way, it's no longer just a place where meals are prepared. It becomes a space that quietly shapes the rhythm of everyday life. Because a disciplined kitchen isn't one where people spend all day making better decisions, it's one where the space has already made many of those decisions for them. A 1-minute Japanese kitchen audit. Before we finish, I'd like to invite you to do something simple. Don't think about renovating your kitchen. Don't think about buying new containers or expensive storage systems. Just take 1 quiet minute the next time you walk into your kitchen. And ask yourself 5 small questions. Does the same cutting board ever touch both raw meat and food that's ready to eat? Is one sponge quietly trying to do 3 different jobs? Is there something sitting in the refrigerator that you've already forgotten? Do outdoor shoes cross farther into your home than they really need to? And when tomorrow morning begins, will you be starting fresh or continuing today's unfinished work? You don't need to change all 7 habits tonight. In fact, I wouldn't recommend it. Just find the one habit that's creating the most unnecessary friction in your daily routine. Maybe it's as simple as marking one side of your cutting board. Maybe it's taking 3 minutes to reset the kitchen before bed. Maybe it's replacing a sponge that's been there far too long. Creating a small shoe boundary near the front door. Setting aside one shelf as an eat-first zone. Or deciding tonight what tomorrow's leftovers will become. Small systems are much easier to repeat than big promises. And over time, those small systems quietly become the way a home feels every single day. A clean kitchen is an expression of care. If there's one thing I'd hope you remember after this video, it's this. A Japanese kitchen isn't meaningful because it's perfectly clean. In fact, no kitchen stays perfect for very long. People cook, children make messes. Life happens. The real lesson isn't perfection, it's care. Care for the food that nourishes us, care for the tools that make daily life a little easier, care for the people who will sit down and share the next meal, care for the home that quietly supports us every single day, and perhaps most importantly, care for the person you'll become tomorrow morning. When you look back at these 7 habits, you'll notice something interesting. None of them ask you to work harder. None of them require expensive equipment. None of them depend on extraordinary discipline. They work because the kitchen has been organized to prevent small problems before they have the chance to become bigger ones. That's the quiet genius behind so many Japanese homes. Instead of asking people to make better decisions all day long, they build spaces that make the better decision feel natural. Over time, those tiny choices become habits. Those habits become routines. And those routines quietly become the feeling people describe as peace. A peaceful home is rarely created by one weekend of deep cleaning. It's created by hundreds of tiny acts of prevention, repeated so often that they become almost invisible. So perhaps the greatest lesson isn't how Japanese people clean their kitchens. It's how they design everyday life with a little more intention. Take care of your kitchen. And it will quietly take care of everyone who walks into it, including you. Before you go, I'd like to leave you with one simple question. For the last 20 minutes, we've been talking about Japanese kitchens. Now I'd like you to stop thinking about Japan and think about your own home. Out of these 7 habits, which one would make the biggest difference in your kitchen tomorrow morning? Not the one that sounds the most impressive. The one that would quietly make everyday life just a little easier. Comment only the number, 1 through 7. I'm genuinely curious which small change would have the biggest impact in real life. And if one number keeps appearing in the comments, I'll make the next video entirely about that single habit, exploring practical Japanese ideas you can actually use in your own home, because that's really what this channel is about, not copying Japan, not chasing perfection, but discovering thoughtful ideas that make ordinary homes feel calmer, lighter, and easier to live in. The truth is, a peaceful home is rarely transformed by one big decision. It's shaped by dozens of tiny decisions that become habits, and habits that eventually become part of who we are. If one small idea from today's video stays with you after you turn off the screen, then this conversation was worth having. And if you'd like to explore more Japanese ideas like these, I'd be honored to have you join me again in the next video.